This is the Lions Unchained podcast, where the shackles of your mind are broken. There comes a time when we either embrace the truth or remain in darkness forever. The Lions Unchained podcast offers you the light of God's truth. The rest is up to you. Join Carl Joseph now for a powerful, life-changing word.
Friend, what exactly is doublespeak and where does this term come from? Well, doublespeak is language that deliberately obscures, disguises, distorts, or reverses the meaning of words. It can take the form of euphemisms, certainly, yet the redefinition of the meaning of the word is perhaps the most direct and effective usage of doublespeak. Someone once quipped, quote, "Doublespeak is the official language of every government," unquote, and it's hard to argue with that statement. You could also argue it is the language of most mainstream media outlets these days. Someone once defined doublespeak as the language which pretends to communicate but doesn't. It is language which makes the bad seem good, the negative seem positive, the unpleasant seem unattractive, or at least tolerable. It is language which avoids, shifts, or denies responsibility. Language which is at variance with its real or purported meaning. It is language which conceals or prevents thought, unquote. We should also bear in mind that jargon can be incorporated as part of doublespeak, but not always. Jargon is the specialized language of a trade, profession, or similar group, such as used by doctors, lawyers, engineers, educators, or car mechanics. And it too can be used to confuse and obscure language when and where needed. Indeed, we've all experienced the confusion of contractual language that only a lawyer paid $300 an hour can decipher. But jargon isn't the focus of this broadcast. The term doublespeak stems from George Orwell's novel 1984, where the terms newspeak and doublethink are used, albeit doublespeak is never explicitly mentioned. Without doubt, doublespeak's most common usage today is found within the political realm, something that Orwell warned us about. Ever since the latter part of the 20th century, language has begun to shift. In the old days, we had sins. Now we just have problems. Banks no longer have bad debts, they have non-performing assets. Water from reclaimed sewage is now labelled reclaimed water. A smoggy place is now an ozone non-attainment zone. Pre-owned is now preferred over used, so on and so forth. Heck, even Vladimir Putin called the invasion of the Ukraine, quote, peacekeeping duties instead of all-out war. George Orwell wrote an essay entitled Politics and the English Language in addition to his famous novels, which discusses linguistic distortion and its purpose in politics especially. Doublespeak includes euphemism, jargon, vagueness, obfuscation, intentional omission, intentional ambiguity, and misdirection to get its point across. You get the picture, right? Are you confused yet? You will be, friend. Basically, any time a politician opens his or her mouth these days, you can be sure there's a good dose of doublespeak thrown in. Orwell once wrote, quote, "In our time," and that would be as far back as the 1940s, by the way, "political speech and writing are largely the defense of the indefensible. Thus, political language has to consist largely of euphemism, question begging, and sheer cloudy vagueness. The great enemy of clear language is insincerity. Where there is a gap between one's real and one's declared aims, one turns, as it were, instinctively to long words and exhausted idioms," unquote. He went on to say, quote, "Political language is designed to make lies sound truthful and murder respectable and to give an appearance of solidity to pure wind," unquote. I think we can all agree that not much has changed since these words were penned in the 1940s. Now, George Orwell, better known as Eric Arthur Blair, born in the shadow of the British Empire in India, was a fascinating character. His most famous novels were, of course, Animal Farm in 1984. Some contend he was an elitist who transmitted his nefarious ideology through his writings. Others claim he only desired to forewarn us of the trappings of the elite and communism, which is the common method elites use to strip the middle class of their wealth. In 1944, Orwell finished Animal Farm, a political fable based on the story of the Russian Revolution and its betrayal by Joseph Stalin. In this book, a group of barnyard animals overthrow and chase off their exploitative human masters and set up an egalitarian society of their own. Eventually, the animals' intelligent and power-loving leaders, the pigs, subvert the revolution and form a dictatorship whose bondage is even more oppressive and heartless than that of their former human masters. A famous quote from Animal Farm is, quote, "All animals are equal, but some animals are more equal than others." And this really encapsulates the highbrow, snobbish demeanor of the elites towards the plebs or common man. At first, Orwell had difficulty finding a publisher for this small masterpiece, but when it appeared in 1945, Animal Farm made him famous and, for the first time, prosperous. Animal Farm was indeed full of wit, fantasy, and was very well written and received by the general public. Then came 1984, first published in 1949, only 4 short years after World War II, a novel he wrote as a warning after years of brooding over the twin menaces of Nazism and Stalinism. The novel is set in an imaginary future in which the world is dominated by 3 perpetually warring totalitarian police states. The book's hero, Winston Smith, is a minor party functionary in one of these states. His longing for truth and decency leads him to secretly rebel against the government, which perpetuates its rule by systematically distorting the truth and continuously rewriting history to suit its own purposes. Smith is then arrested by the thought police. The ensuing imprisonment, torture, and re-education of Smith are intended not merely to break him physically or make him submit, but to root out his independent mental existence and his spiritual dignity until he can love only the figure he previously most hated, the leader of the party, also known as Big Brother. However, the novel gains much of its power from its analysis of totalitarianism and its logical end. In other words, the love of power and domination of others, which finds its perfected expression in the perpetual surveillance of all citizens and the irresistible police state under whose rule every human virtue is extinguished. From this book, new words were etched into the conscience of society. Phrases like Big Brother is watching you, newspeak, and doublethink. These became bywords for modern political abuses. Ironically, Orwell wrote 1984 on the remote Scottish island of Jura, as far away from the society he forewarned us about as you could get. And today, in the nation of the United Kingdom, we have seen a rapid and disturbing rise in the curtailment of free speech, surveillance of its citizenry, and words which have been deemed offensive by the current government. So much so that people are now being arrested for speech infringement. Free speech, friend, is in fact becoming a thing of the past, as Orwell warned. So what does the Bible have to say about this? Isaiah 5:20 has the answer. Woe unto them that call evil good and good evil, that put darkness for light and light for darkness, that put bitter for sweet and sweet for bitter. In the Bible, those who practice doublespeak would be accused of having a froward tongue. This is a perversion which God detests. The word froward is a dialectic form of fromward. It is the opposite of toward, as we say to and fro, and to and from. Thus, its meaning is perverse, deceitful, and represents falsehood. The term froward is used chiefly in the book of Proverbs, and let me quote a few scriptures for you now. Proverbs chapter 10 verse 32 says, "The lips of the righteous know what is acceptable, but the mouth of the wicked speaks frowardness." Proverbs chapter 16 verse 30 says, "He shuts his eyes to devise froward things. Moving his lips, he brings evil to pass." And finally, Proverbs 11:20, "They that are of a froward heart are an abomination to the Lord, but the upright in their way are his delight." Lest we forget, the tongue of the serpent was forked. It had two edges. In the New Testament, froward occurs only once in 1 Peter 2:18, where it reflects the tortuous-like course of a river, meaning a conduct that is not straightforward. And as I'm sure you have witnessed, trying to understand what exactly most politicians are really saying these days is a very difficult task indeed. In sharp contrast, when it comes to our faith, we should have a singular tongue, a singular mind. We mean what we say, and we say what we mean. Kind of like John Wayne, right? This is also embodied in Scripture. Jesus didn't mince words. He never beat around the bush. He never spoke in secret. He talked plainly the vast majority of the time, so that those who were not educated could understand him just as well. He did speak in parable on occasion, and there are many reasons for that. There is a measure of pride in academia which desires to use lofty language to appear cleverer than most, but in the meantime losing the audience along the way. In fact, modern Bible translations seek to use convoluted and lofty words which can only cloud the simplicity of the scriptures found within the pages of the King James Bible. And recent evaluation shows the reading level of the King James to be about 5th grade, yet modern Bibles are shown to be between the 6th and 9th grade reading levels as a whole. In fact, one of the rules of Bible interpretation is, if the plain sense of the text makes sense, seek no other sense. So we interpret our Bibles literally as much as we can. Believe it or not, there is actually a Doublespeak award handed out to the most confusing statement made by a person or industry, and of course politicians often win the award each year. In 2001, when debate on the detrimental effects of pollution and global warming was raging, a leak of a confidential memo embarrassed the Republican Party. In this memo, Frank Luntz, who had been a long-standing communications consultant advising the then President George Bush, told the party to stop using the term global warming and use climate change instead. The idea was that warming implied a subject. In other words, someone or something that was doing the warming, while change implied something that was not necessarily controlled by anyone, nor was it necessarily good or bad. And of course, doublespeak has historically been used and is still being used today to deceive us from the elite's real intentions. It has an esoteric agenda, an agenda which is hidden to the masses by deliberately obfuscating the message. In the case of global warming, this is perhaps the biggest example of doublespeak ever devised. The notion that man is responsible for, quote, global warming, or more specifically anthropogenic global warming, is of course farcical. When one considers the CO2 or carbon dioxide represents, wait for it, 0.04% of the Earth's atmosphere to begin with, and man only controls a meager 3% of that figure. The belief that man is changing his climate by fossil fuels is a function of our education system, which seeks to indoctrinate rather than educate. Global warming, as I've said on previous broadcasts, is a ruse by the elite to send humanity back to the feudal system, which the aristocrats of old employed and enjoyed. Few realize, in fact, the Club of Rome, which was a Masonic lodge, came up with global warming in the first place. Founded in 1968 on David Rockefeller's estate in Bellagio, Italy, this club comprises heads of state, scientists, economists, and business leaders. In 1991, it admitted to inventing climate change, to pit man against a common enemy, in other words, himself. And let me quote now from a report published from this lodge. Quote, in search for a common enemy against whom we can unite, we came up with the idea that pollution, the threat of global warming, water shortages, famine, and the like would fit the bill. In their totality and their interactions, these phenomena do constitute a common threat which must be confronted by everyone together. It would seem that men and women need a common motivation, namely a common adversary against whom they can organize themselves and act together. And so the fight against carbon emissions was chosen as the means to pit man against himself, and billions of dollars have been made by corporations in the process in the form of carbon tax credits. How gullible are we? And the elitists are laughing all the way to the bank. Mark Bittman wrote an article in the New York Times on June the 25th, 2015, citing doublespeak in Texas, stating, quote, "The Texas Department of Agriculture issued a press release that simultaneously touted its efforts to combat child obesity, while also lifting a decade-old ban on deep fat fryers in public schools, because nothing slims a child's waist faster than a helping of French fries." Unquote. This example is comical, friend, but it is sadly a reflection of the way our society is going, and that's what Orwell warned us about. Is the climate changing? Certainly. There are signs in the heavens, signs in weather that Christ is returning soon. But whether or not man is actually causing these changes, I believe is deceitful. In closing, doublespeak is devilish, dastardly, and deceitful. It is the language of Satan, the father of lies, forked-tongued politicians, and global elitists. And of course, for the United Nations and its 2030 agenda, world peace can only be achieved if the pesky plebs are kept in safe cities, crammed in like rats, unable to travel freely, and every financial transaction tightly monitored 24/7 under the threat of tyranny. Only the Prince of Peace can usher in real peace. Until such time, any promise of authentic peace is merely a counterfeit, friend, hinging upon total control of the societal population. If language is the foundation of communication, then Satan desires to corrupt each word's meaning until ambiguity reigns supreme. The serpent, being more subtle than any other beast, questioned God's word from the outset. His modus operandi is confusion and subversion. Whatever is in the heart, friend, will eventually come out of the mouth, and those who seek to subvert will eventually be found out. Our speech is an expression of our heart, and our words will inevitably reflect its condition. I will end with Matthew's Gospel, chapter 5, verse 37. Let your yes be simply yes, and your no be simply no. Anything more than that comes from the evil one.
You've been listening to Carl Joseph and the Lions Unchained podcast. Carl is a minister who's witnessed God's supernatural power to save, heal, and deliver. Carl is a unique researcher who investigates current affairs, societal trends, technology, cults, and end-time events, all through a biblical lens. Every Monday, new podcasts are uploaded, so stay tuned for the next opportunity to roar into victory. Check out carljosephministries.com for exciting articles, teachings, and discussion points. See you next week. And don't forget to hit the subscribe button.